First off, welcome to our guest today. We've got Steve Disselhorst joining us. Steve is an author as of this week, father, husband, consultant for D&I issues, and we are delighted to have him joining us today as his new book, Determined to be Dad, was launched on, or was released on Tuesday. So first of all, Steve, congrats on the new book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're delighted to have you here. So before we, or as we get started here, Steve, it'd be great for everybody on the call just to hear a bit more of your background. We were talking before who you grew up in the Midwest. Yeah, give us the background here. What do we need to know about you?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest, close to where you, Liam, live right now. I went to the University of Iowa, so spent most of my time in the Midwest until my 20s. Moved to California and then came out shortly after moving to California. That was back in the early 90s, sort of in the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, or sort of middle of the AIDS epidemic. And it was a challenging time, to come out and be a gay man. And it was similar to some of the things we're facing right now with the pandemic. It was a scary time, right? So, also, that time there wasn't gay marriage. There was no same-sex marriage. Gay men were not having children. And so I always wanted to be a parent, but then I sort of had to put it on a shelf thinking it wasn't possible for me. And then things started to change. And then I met my current husband and we started to talk about it. And it took us until about 2010. And then we started the process in 2010. And we thought about both surrogacy and adoption. And then we ultimately landed on adoption, and we have two children that we both adopted. The first was born in 2012 and the second in 2015. So they're both 4 and 8 now.
Fantastic. And then tell us more about the premise of the book and why you decided to write a book on your experiences.
Yeah, so what I found was when we were going through the adoptions, and then after, when I would share with people the story around how challenging it was to create our family, people often told me that it was inspiring. And, I have a network of friends. It's not that big. So I was like, how can I make a bigger impact? And then I started doing more of the research around millennials and LGBTQ millennials specifically, wanting to create families. And it's a big number. It's about 3.5 million LGBTQ millennials that are thinking about creating families, and very different from my generation. Like, this is part of their DNA. They want families. And so I really thought, I want to share my story as a way to help them. And then also really to share my story for the larger LGBTQ movement for full equality.
And so you've talked there, Steve, about the challenges faced with adoption. For those on the call, which might be the majority, I'm guessing, who aren't familiar with the adoption process, can you talk about what kind of challenges you have, and then specifically as a same-sex couple, what that was like, and what additional challenges, if any, you faced through there?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the challenges right now, if for your audience more directly that are thinking about adoption, is birth rates have gone down, and there's not as many children available for adoption as there used to be historically. So it's just, and then a lot of people, especially in these major metropolitan areas, professionals are, they're waiting to have children until later in life, right? So, and then there becomes fertility issues. So what we faced was we just had to wait a long time. For our first child, we did an open adoption with a private agency, and the agency had like 200 to 300 different families waiting. And so we were in that pool, and we ended up having 14 contacts with different women over 2 years before we finally met the birth family that is our daughter's birth family. So it was a long time, 14 different contacts, a lot of different places in their pregnancies. And so that was really challenging. It was a lot of this, up and down. So that was for our daughter. And then our son, we went through the foster to adopt program, which is a very different program. So the children that go through foster to adopt, they've been removed from the family home, the birth family home, the biologic family home for some type of reason that the parent's not able to take care of the child. So that is that process is very much focused on social services for the county or the city or wherever you're at, and they're the decision maker about the child being placed in your home, and then ultimately the courts deciding if it's a placement for adoption. So very different situations, but each with their own unique challenges.
Yeah, talking about the first adoption there, Steve, going through, I think you said 14 contacts with different women in 2 years. Like, how do you deal with that emotionally? That must be incredibly tough to go through the highs and the hope and then the setbacks. How was that?
So that's one of the primary reasons I wrote about the book, because there's a lot of adoption books out there around process. They tell you what you need to do, and, they give you very specific information, but they don't tell you what it's like to wait. They don't tell you what it's like to have someone call you and you spend, 4 to 6 weeks with someone on the phone building a relationship, and then all of a sudden they've decided maybe they're not going to place their child for adoption, or they decided to go with another family. And so, I think for me and for our family, my husband and myself, we just had a real faith in the fact that we were meant to be parents. And so when we had, situations that didn't work out in our favor, which happened 14 times, we had to pick ourselves up and just kind of go up to the big picture, right? And say, what's the ultimate goal and what are we willing to do and wait for? So, but it was hard. I mean, there were periods where, we became very cynical, so yeah, we had one situation where we had a woman who contacted us who was actually not pregnant. And she, what they call it's an emotional scam. She engaged with us. She sent us pictures, she was like, I want to place my child with you. I mean, we spent a huge amount of time with her, and she turned out to be a fraud. She wasn't pregnant. So those things happen along the way, and it's hard.
I can only imagine. So then on the flip side of that, when it all finally comes together, 2 years of trying, what was a kind of heartbreaking setback? What was that first day like when your daughter came home with you?
Yes, I think the thing that was really amazing was that when we got the call for our daughter's family, we got called by a man. Actually, it was the father. And throughout our entire process, we'd never had a man reach us directly, but immediately we felt a connection. There was like this immediate connection with him. And when we met them 4 or 5 days before my daughter was born. We met them. We didn't know when she was due, so we met them thinking there was about a month to 6 weeks until she was going to be born. We met them and we just immediately connected. It was like, it's like, when you go to a conference or a meeting and you meet a person and all of a sudden you just start a conversation like really deep. So we knew it was a good fit. And then over the next 5 days, all the decisions that go into parenting, they started saying to us, you're the parent, you decide. Like, you want to name the child, you decide the name. When our daughter was born, they said, you hold her first. It was, we were the parents from before she was actually born. So it was really, and then she was born, and obviously it was, we were in the birthing suite. The birth mother was very open and was very much wanted us there. And so, it was amazing. I mean, it was amazing, right? Like, 2 men never not being able to biologically have children, to be there to see our daughter come into the world. It was beautiful. Yeah.
I can imagine. And I guess to go back in history there, and so you talked about those early days after coming out in California. Could you have ever imagined that moment back in those days? I mean, this seems to be so far flung from that.
I couldn't. It's funny. There are still days when I sort of pinch myself that it's actually happened. Like when my son will sit in my lap, or I'll pick my kids up at school, and they'll grab my hand as they're walking home, and I'll be like, wow, this is real. Like, it's just, our lives are crazy busy, right? Like, we forget about the gifts that we have that are right in front of us. And children are hard work, so they're not always gifts, as you know, right? So, but they are truly gifts. So it's just, it's very cool.
Great. So tell us about the kids now. What are they into? What does Father's Day this weekend look like for you? What are their obsessions? What are they like?
Yeah. So what's really cool is that this week on Monday, they started back at camps where we live. We live on the peninsula, and they started camps again. Social distancing, like they figured it out. So this week they're back in school. I would say my daughter is obsessed with horses, and she's always like, when are you going to buy me a horse? And I'm like, she's 8, and I'm like, we count money. I'm like, it takes a lot of that. Like, she's learning money. Like, it's like, you're not getting a real horse, right? That's what she's obsessed with. She just got a scooter. She loves that. And she's really into drawing. She's really into artwork. So those are the things she's into. And then my son, he's 4. He's really into ninjas. He's a very physical kid, and he really likes music. So those are the things and I would say Legos. Like, he's obsessed with Legos too.
Maybe if the book does well, the horse could be an option after all. There's hoping.
Thank you.
And so tell us a bit more about kind of family life and is how different home life is as a homosexual couple versus a heterosexual couple. Like, is it different at all? Is it the same? Like, talk us through how that is.
So I would say it's not very different, right? So in some aspects, in other aspects, it is very different. So I would say, taking care of children is the same, right? Whether it's the grandparents or 2 men or 2 women or a man and a woman taking, like, bottle feeding and diaper changing and, putting them to sleep, it's all the same, right? And family life is very much, I would say, when you become a parent, you're less focused on yourself and your partner, you're focused on your kids, right? Like, that's where you're focused. So I'd say that's all very much similar. The differences are for us, and I think in the Bay Area, similar, is for two men working. We decided on the roles, and they're always changing on who does what. So we're not focused on sort of traditional roles. We get to talk about, like, what are the things that are important to you? What do you like to do as a parent? And then we make decisions around, like, those activities. And that's, I would say, could be different. And I would say the other thing is showing up in the world is different, right? Going out to school. So we don't live in San Francisco. We live about 10 miles away, and we're the only same-sex family in the school of 600 kids. So we're always educating, and we're always having to, like, teach folks what it's like. And also teaching the schools and teachers and the administrators, like, how do we create inclusive spaces for all kinds of people?
Great. And so talking about kind of the adoption process there, for anyone who's on this call and is thinking about it or has been a topic that they've done, what advice would you give? What resources? How do they get started, aside from buying your book, of course?
Yeah. So the advice I would give folks is, really sit down and with your partner and really talk about, like, what is important to you. I think that that talking about what's important to you is really key, because we all have different ideas around parenting, and we all have different ideas around, like, what it means to be a parent. So talking about those things, because those things ultimately come up. I would say that's really important. I would say start sooner than later. A lot of people think, like, over the next 12 to 24 months, I'm going to be working on this big project and, like, I don't have capacity. But the reality is adoption and surrogacy, they both take huge amount of time. Sometimes you get lucky and they happen quickly, but I would say the majority of time, it takes a long time. And so start earlier, because if you're, you're going into it and you're whatever, 35 or 40, add on 3 years before you have a child, right? And so I would say those would be the big things. And then also just realize it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And the other really key important thing is, in our professional worlds that we live in, we try to control things, right? Like we try to control, the environment that we're in. We try to have the best outcomes. You have no control in this environment. I mean, you have very little control. You have to go to a place of acceptance. And that's hard for a lot of us who've worked hard and been able to like sort of get ahead in the world, and by just, continuing to work hard. In this case, it has nothing to do with that. It's really, you need to accept where you're at and just kind of deal with the ups and downs.
Got it. And so going maybe a little bit step even more broadly here, parenting for maybe the new parents on the call, or those folks who are about to be parents. How do we do this? How do we parent? Any pro tips? What advice you would give to new parents, whether they're homosexual, heterosexual couple? What advice do you like to give?
Yeah. So The Happiest Baby on the Block is a book that I read and used for my children up to 1 years old. I think that book has a lot in there about how you calm children. And that's a really key thing. So the beginning of their lives and how they're interact in the first 12 months of their lives has a big impact on how they are in the world. So for anyone on the call, what I would suggest is maximize your paternity leave. Take as much time as you can as your employer allows. In the state of California, we're lucky. We get up to 3 months, portion of it paid, and many employers pay part of that, but take the maximum. And the other thing that we did was we staggered it. So for my daughter, I took it first because my husband was in the middle of this big project at work. So I took the first 3 months, and then he took the second 3 months. And so the two of us were home for 6 months. So that's really important. Same for our child. My husband went first, or for my son, the same. My husband went first and I went second. So both of our kids had 6 months at home with a parent. And then as I think one of the biggest lessons, you probably agree with this, is that, with your kids, you want to teach them values and you want to teach them integrity. And in many cases, we try to teach them to be like us, but everyone's unique, right? So it's this push and pull of finding the line of what is the values you want to instill, and then also giving them the space to be who they are individually. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, we had the Happiest Baby on the...
What are your thoughts?
The book that we've used the most has been Moms on Call. Okay. It's a really good book for sleep. My experience has been that once you can start getting the sleep piece figured out, then parents get more relaxed. Everything gets a little bit easier. But yeah, my eldest is 2. My newest is 2 months.
Wow, you're in the thick of it.
We're right in the middle of it. This is an interesting time to have kids, that's for sure. But it's been good, and we're getting through the lack of sleep now. We're not quite sleeping through the night with a 2-month-old, but we're getting to it's not 3 or 4 wake ups in the night, which is nice. I don't know. Our experience has been that we're all just figuring this out, and that it's as much trial and error as it is pre-planned on the parenting and the discipline stuff. And
that's right.
And so obviously we've got, Father's Day coming up this weekend. Do you have plans? Are you still restricted by where you can and cannot go? What have you got on the agenda?
So we're things are starting to open up in Northern California. And so we just learned that we go to a church that we haven't been to in 4 months or whatever. We just learned they're taking reservations, because they have to do the 6 feet apart. And so one of the things I need to do after this call is to see if we can get into church on Sunday morning, and then, we'll have brunch and we'll take the kids out on their bikes and, just have a casual, fun day. We don't, we don't have anything. We live near the Pacific Ocean, so we're lucky we can kind of plan last minute where we go and what we're going to do.
Fantastic. And on that theme, as a gay couple, what's Mother's Day like for you guys? Like, is that something you celebrate? Do we just kind of ignore it? How does that work?
We definitely celebrate Mother's Day. So our children came into the world because of mothers, right? So it's a really important holiday for us. And as men in this society, we often have to step into what would be considered traditional mother roles. So for us, it's sort of like we celebrate both holidays. One of the things about Mother's Day is challenging though for our family is that, your child is probably in preschool or daycare, starting daycare. There's a lot of focus on Mother's Day for like 3 to 4 weeks before it happens. And one of the things in the beginning, we hadn't really thought about it, right? And then all of a sudden, like we had an experience where my daughter was asked to do like a assignment of like, what's your mom's favorite food? What's your mom's favorite color? And they didn't really ask us. And it was really like upsetting for her because she doesn't know all those things about her mom. So what we learned over the years is we talked to the teachers and parents or administrators in advance and really try to ask them to create an environment that's inclusive. We don't want not to celebrate Mother's Day, but we want them to be inclusive. So that's one thing we've done a lot of work on.
Interesting. And then on the same note, then, how do you, as a couple, when did you decide to start talking about these issues with your kids? Because that's a real difficult one for a lot of topics. But like, when do you start having these conversations about, your parents might look a little bit different to the other parents at school, for example, and those kind of conversations? When did you start having those?
Well, we've talked about our children's adoption since they were born. I mean, since our daughter was born, we have pictures of her birth family. We as soon as they're able to start looking at books, we were sharing images of, her birth family. And so we talk about our family being different. We have a lot of books that share those differences. And so it's just interwoven into what we do. What they tell you is that, it's age appropriate. You talk about different aspects of it. So when they're young, you give them really basic information. And then as they grow older, you just start to layer in more information.
Got it. And so if it's okay with you, Steve, I'd love to change tack a little bit here. We understand you this kind of expert author on parenting, but your career is much broader than just parenting. Of course, your career is often very focused on, has been recently focused on diversity and inclusion. Yeah. And safe to say a lot of companies, we hope all companies, have been reassessing their own policies and approaches to particularly the Black Lives Matter movement in the last couple of weeks. You're a consultant. If a company like Yelp was to come to you right now and say, okay, Steve, how can we get better? What kind of things do we need to be thinking about right now? What kind of advice would you give to Yelp or any company in the current climate?
I mean, I would give the advice I would give to Yelp and any company and companies that I've been chatting with is you need to be open and honest. You need to think about, first of all, you really need to go back to your values as a company and, what is your purpose as an organization and how does your purpose align with what's happening with the current environment with Black Lives Matter and how does it align? And then you need to be very vocal about that. And you need to be vocal about it both from an employee perspective because Black employees and employees of color are really struggling. And so you need to be open about how do you help them through this time. But then you need to be vocal as well as what's your position to the outside community. And so, having a statement and addressing very publicly your values and how they align to ending racism, I think is key.
And so how do you see, I guess a better question to ask, what is your hope over the next, say, longer period of time, 6 months, 12 months, where this isn't just a moment in time, but becomes a movement? What are you hoping for from companies, government, society in general? I'd love your take on that.
Yeah. So I think companies' policies need to change. to be more inclusive of all communities, and there needs to be a lot of work done in companies around culture and thinking about the current hierarchy in companies and how does that hierarchy reinforce sort of quote unquote white supremacy, and how does your company culture really reinforce that, and then looking at how do you change that? What are the things that you can do from an executive level down to every level in the organization of how you flatten the organization and how you make every employee have a voice, and creating a culture of that, I think is key. I think the other thing is that what we saw with same-sex marriage, it was really corporations were early on the ones that were providing benefits and changing policies prior to what the Supreme Court ruling. A lot of companies were already treating same-sex couples really as a married couple. And so it's important that for overall societal change, corporations will be very critical in what's their long-term plan for creating a more inclusive and equitable workplace, and then sticking with that plan. And so this isn't a flashpoint. It's really about how do we stay with it? How do we look at everything within our company from a policy perspective that will make it more inclusive?
Got it. And talking about the Supreme Court, there was a big ruling earlier this week there. Yeah. Talk us through how important that was.
That's so what I will say about the Supreme Court ruling this week is it was really the framework of what happened for the LGBTQ community this week was really built off the civil rights movement of the Black Freedom Movement in 1963. The March on Washington in 1963 was led up by Bayard Rustin, who's a gay Black man. He organized that march. That march set in place for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is exactly what the Supreme Court ruled on this last week. And so the struggle for equality that the LGBTQ community has gone through is really intertwined and is on the shoulders of the Black community. And so our struggles are intertwined. While they're very different in many ways, we really need to look at our accomplishments and really be thinking about how do we support equality for every American in this country.
Fantastic. And Steve, we're almost at time here. And so I guess the last opportunity for you here is to give us a plug. Like, book came out on Tuesday. Where can we get it? Why should we get it?
Yeah, so thanks. I'm going to do a quick plug. Determined to be Dad. It's available at all the major retailers, so Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, IndieBound, and Books A Million. I'm also have a website where I'm signing copies, since we're still in this social SIP and social distancing. Like, I'm not doing in-person signings right now, so folks can order it there as well, and I can send a signed copy. But it's available. It's available, and you can just quickly search it on Google or Amazon, and you'll find it. Determined to be Dad. So yeah,
wonderful. And I guess the follow-up question to that would be, obviously, I imagine this would be very helpful for LGBTQ couples, particularly those looking to adopt. Yeah. But I'm assuming this will be interesting and helpful, and will open people's viewpoint and horizons from who are not from that background.
Yeah. So the stories and the experiences I've had in my life have been very much intertwined. The first adoption agency that we went and worked with, that we ended up using for our daughter, we were 25% of us were LGBTQ, the rest were heterosexual. A lot of those folks in that room were folks that were having fertility issues. And I write about the experience in the book around people that struggle with fertility. They go through a lot of shame around it, like, what's wrong with me? It's very similar to what many LGBTQ people feel about themselves when they first start to come out. Like, why am I different? Why am I not like everyone else? It's changing, but it's still a thing that I know for me, I felt a lot of shame coming out. And so there's that intersection there. So the book has a lot of stories around, I talk about once we had kids and where we were living, we ended up spending more time with heterosexual couples. Like, that whole shift, because now parenting was the key to our, sort of the center of our lives. So the book has wide application. So parents that kids might be coming out. Like a lot of parents, they think, oh, my child's, gay now. I'm not going to have a grandchild. It's like, yes, you can absolutely have a grandchild. So it's a great read for a lot of different folks. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Steve, we're at time. Thank you so much. It's been so inspiring to hear you talk. Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing all your ideas with us. It's been incredibly powerful, and we're so grateful. And best of luck with the book. And I hope you enjoy Father's Day this weekend.
You too. Thank you, Liam, and thank you, Uli, for all your work to set this up. And good luck, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care.